please do wash your hands, wear the mask, because then you're going to stop the spread.
When is the flu not the flu? When we need to control you. Super flu is back. Get in your house. Here's the mainstream media telling you to stop the spread.
It's a bit of a throwback, isn't it? We were used to wearing these a few years ago. Now this is the precaution being taken. Also, people are being told to make sure their hands are clean and that they're not bringing germs into the hospital. We're in the outpatients here.
That's just ridiculous. If in Germany they started dishing out yellow stars again and pink triangles, do you think people might go, wait a minute. Okay, if we want you to register for special benefits here in this place. You might go, we're not fucking doing that again. But when it comes to the mask, don't do it. Don't comply. They're not telling you the truth. Why don't you talk to the many doctors and nurses that regret taking the shot? Why don't you talk to the members of the military that have had to be readmitted after not taking the shot? I know they're not making the claim that this is directly analogous or identical to COVID, but it's similar enough to warrant your cynicism.
At Sunderland Royal, and you can see the campaign is very clear indeed. That's because in the past couple of weeks they have seen the number of...
That lady just glitched. Was that just me?
They have seen the number of patients with flu here and at their sister...
With flu, not from flu.
Flu here and at their sister hospital tripled to 45 patients.
Where's the fucking people in that hospital, by the way? Have you been to an hospital lately? It's like that, just a bunch of screens, dark, depressing, weird. What's happening to our country? What's going on in the UK? Or UCK, as I call it, because it's...
That's kind of reflecting the national picture as well, where last week 1,700 patients across England were admitted and they were suffering from flu. That's a 50% rise on this time.
Well, why don't we have a ticker across the bottom of the screen telling us how many people are dying of flu? They've had time to put a Christmas tree up. My God, the UK is crazy and it's in serious trouble, but don't worry, it's going to be okay. We are going to organise some meaningful resistance, whether it's opposing the digital ID, or to getting rid of trial by jury, or any one of any facial recognition, potential war with Russia. I can do a longer list if you want to. It's totally corrupt. You need a new Oliver Cromwell. Not that Oliver Cromwell's behaviour to the Irish wasn't appalling. There's a revolution coming. Let's get into it.
Look, just because the number of patients rising has started earlier doesn't mean this flu season is going to end earlier. And NHS bosses are really quite concerned about the pressure that is going to be put on services, hence those figures coming out later. We also know that in Birmingham, 4 hospitals have declared a critical incident.
Get that mask off. There's no one in there. There's no one else in there. Don't do things for no reason. Don't do things for no reason. Stop bowing down and kowtowing to your false idols of the state. Stop worshipping at the awe of the BBC. You can't trust them. You cannot trust the legacy media. All of these institutions that I would have laid down my life for once, the BBC, the NHS, people did lay down their lives from. Our ancestors laid down their lives from. Not that long ago, less than 100 years ago, members of your family died so that you could have state-funded institutions like the BBC. They raise a tax, don't they, through licenses that's mandatory, so it's a tax, and the NHS, which your taxes pay for. These were beautiful ideas. These were good versions of secular saints. The NHS, a feminine saint that provides care and nurture and love and concern. What a beautiful idea. Totally corrupted, totally disrupted, total chaos, being utilised now to legitimise authoritarianism and government overreach. It's happened before, happened in 2019, and it's happening now. Don't trust them again.
Partly because of the number of flu cases putting those pressures on. And we know that up in the northeast, this isn't the only hospital that has introduced the mask wearing and, of course, that washing of hands that we have been talking about. So the message is, if you're coming into hospitals, please do wash your hands, wear the mask, because then you're going to stop the spread.
Why is the BBC doing that? Why is the BBC saying that? We've already had the science. Here is Chris Whitty, the since proven somewhat corrupt leader of British health policy during 2019, saying masks don't do anything. Right, pay attention.
And hopefully reduce the pressure that is being put on services. Look, we know that some people can present with mild symptoms, and bosses here are saying you may have mild symptoms, but if you pass it on to somebody who's vulnerable, that's going to possibly cause more.
Because, the old vulnerable technique, you see, someone vulnerable. There's always these imaginary vulnerable people that the BBC and the government are protecting. You might be all right. You might be able to run your own life, run your own family, run your own community. You might be strong and connected to God. But what about vulnerable people? I'll tell you what. I'll tell you the last people I'm going to trust to look after the vulnerable. It's you lying, corrupt, filthy scum.
So, mask wearing, hand washing, and those figures coming out later today are going to give a true picture of what is going on, but everybody can do their bit to try to prevent the spread of flu, for now at least.
It's inevitable, really. We're all going to get flu. Yeah, flu. So, fucking what? Yeah, well, people will die. Yeah, well, not people will die. Everyone's going to die. Everyone's going to die. How about having some integrity while you're alive? It's not a personal attack on that lady, journalist, whatever she would like to be called. She's got fantastic hair, and when it comes to conditioner, I'd take her advice to the ends of the earth. But when it comes to masks, she's plainly lying, because we've already been on this roundabout. As the familiar health warnings of 2020 begin to dominate once more, fresh scandals rip through the institutions that shaped the pandemic years. So, are we finally seeing the cracks in a system whose hidden incentives may have steered a nation's fate? Or will history repeat herself again? The loudmouth, repetitive bitch. Schools across the UK are falling back into lockdown as a flu outbreak sweeps classrooms, and public health officials urge mask wearing, even though they admitted last time that masks don't work. I know what they'll say. They'll go, oh, well, masks don't work under these circumstances, but they work under these circumstances. Stop the spread, flatten the curve, take the spike, have a jab. It'll be the usual stuff. Public health officials urge mask wearing with the same familiar language that dominated the winter of 2020. Yet the timing's more alarming because 3 major revelations have erupted at once, tearing open the sealed vault of decisions that shaped the pandemic years. The stories breaking in 2025 are the very scandals that were dismissed as paranoia and misinformation or conspiracy in 2020. Let's get into it. First came the disclosures that England's chief medical officer pressured government ethics advisors to stop putting their concerns in writing. That's interesting. The Moral and Ethical Advisory Group, or MEAG, you MEAGs, you can't trust MEAGs, was created to guide ministers through the most difficult trade-offs of the pandemic. Trade-offs? It was meant to ensure that policy never drifted into a moral void. That's the least you can do in it as a government. Are we in a moral void right now? Wait a minute. Wait. Is this a moral void that we've been living in? Yeah, it's a moral void because you killed God and replaced it with, well, Satan, but via dominion, property, profit, stuff like that. But as soon as MEAG raised concerns about lockdown harms, vaccine passports, and the rushed push to vaccinate children, it was pushed aside. Chris Whitty went as far as advising the group to stop putting its recommendations in writing. Don't write any of this down because it might look bad in a couple of years when everyone finds out we were lying. Who remembers the bit when Chris Whitty was jostled by youths? Those youths got pretty punishing sentences as well, as I recall. They just saw Chris Whitty, and this is when I sort of realised that I kind of love dumb culture, is because what happened is like Chris Whitty was like our chief medical officer, and he was like sort of like a bald, like scientist guy. He was not even as charismatic as someone like Fauci, right? He was sort of like a hello, and he looked a bit like he might have sort of an undercurrent of eczema, you know, them people where they've not got eczema, but you could see that they could easily get it, right? He looked like that. And like these lads saw him in a park, like football lads. And because the culture's so stupid now, they just sort of treated him like a celebrity. Hey, Chris Whitty! They sort of like shook him around. Please, sorry.
Hey!
One photo, please.
Hey, one photo, mate.
One photo.
I'm gonna change that.
It was very funny. It was awful because poor Chris Whitty is a human being. But it's also funny because the culture has used media and semiotics in such a trite and trivialising way, like i.e. everyone tried to turn Fauci into a sort of celebrity. Well, that's what people do. Like, you think I've not had to deal with stuff like that as a famous person, people getting like too fucking hands-on and aggressive. Crazy, man. Members reported feeling sidelined and effectively banned from discussing the pandemic while ministers pushed ahead with unprecedented restrictions. When the group prepared a memo stressing that vaccines for healthy children were invasive, irreversible, and may have long-term side effects. Yes, they were invasive. Yes, irreversible. Everything's irreversible, basically. And long-term side effects, bingo, baby, it was suppressed. A whistleblower said they were told to stop this. Could you stop this? Could you stop raising concerns? It's not like we have a primary duty to not be in a moral void. You shouldn't be in a moral void. Oh, man. MEAG meetings were cancelled when they raised concerns. At the moment when the nation most needed independent scrutiny, it was deliberately shut down. Let me know in the comments and chat why that would be. Why would you shut down independent scrutiny? Because guess what I was doing during the COVID pandemic? I was offering independent scrutiny. It was advised by experts in the same way that you are. Like, I was reading Robert Malone or Peter McCulloch or Jay Bhattacharya or Marty Makari or Robert Kennedy or other people that are subject to attack, even if they're in government at this point. And we were making our own independent assessments. And, you know, we followed the actual science, discourse analysis, clinical trial. And it turns out that we, that collective we, the anti-establishment dissidents, were right. And it turns out that if you do that, they will try and destroy you. So do pay attention. Make sure you mean it. Otherwise, you might not like it when they try and destroy you. Then came two bombshell headlines from legacy outlets that once dismissed skepticism as misinformation. The Atlantic. Yes, some children may have died from COVID shots, they now acknowledge. The Telegraph, who of course reported the stories, Russell Brand rapists, they now admit how COVID vaccines can cause heart damage. Articles like these would have been unimaginable in the media landscape of 2021 when even asking such questions invited smears, bans and professional destruction. Now they read like late confessions from institutions trying to outrun the truth while simultaneously telling you to believe in superflu. We've got the James Gunn version of superflu now. We've reimagined superflu. It's like a Guardians of the Galaxy COVID. It's a fun new COVID. But the most chilling report may be the one showing that 26 members of SAGE, the scientific advisory group whose modelling and counsel shaped every lockdown policy, get ready guys, failed to disclose more than $200 million in grants from the Wellcome Trust. Wellcome, if you didn't know, is one of the world's most powerful medical research funders with deep, let me emphasize that, deep ties to the pharmaceutical sector, and had publicly declared early in the pandemic that drugs, vaccines and rapid diagnostics were the only exit strategy. Many of the same SAGE voices that were urging the government towards that path were simultaneously receiving millions in funding from Wellcome. Funding the public was never ever told about. 26 scientists in positions of immense influence shaping politics that affected every citizen, every child, while withholding financial relationships with the very sector that stood to profit from a pharmaceutical first pandemic response. What a miracle. Pay attention if you're in the UK now that they're trying to get rid of jury trials, they're trying to introduce digital ID, they're trying to get you into a war with Russia. Be disobedient now. Against this backdrop, the flu surge feels almost symbolic, as if the boundary between past and present is collapsing. Yeah, it does feel like that, doesn't it? Like time itself is speeding up because the communication of information is so rapid. Think about it. At the advent of the Gutenberg press, the world changed so rapidly. People had access to example, to scripture in a variety of languages. It changed people's relationships with institutional religion. Now, everyone's talking all the time. That doesn't mean there's a lot of nonsense that gets said. Some of the stuff I say, of course, necessarily is nonsense. I'm wrong a bunch. But you can now aggregate information yourself. Take a little bit from over here, take a bit from over here, and as long as the results are don't ever trust the media, don't ever trust the government, you won't go far wrong. During COVID, flu all but vanished. Do you remember that? Do you remember that they stopped talking about flu because they were using flu statistically to bolster the COVID numbers? It was overwhelmed and displaced by a single overwhelming diagnosis. Now COVID has slipped into the background while flu resurges. They don't believe in COVID anymore, but they might believe in new super flu. Yes, let's try that. Have they traded places depending on what served institutional interests at the time? Or were the categories always more fluid than officials admitted? It can only be one. When systems encourage political outcomes rather than clinical clarity, even basic epidemiology becomes a shadow play, doesn't it? That's what's happening. Here's Scott Gottlieb, but you could just call him Scottlieb, save yourself a syllable. A man who looks like a little boy out of the Munsters and talks like a person who works at the FDA only to go and get a job at Pfizer, because that's what he is.
They're systematically trying to dismantle components of the vaccine approval process and make sure vaccines won't be available. That's in fact what the memo was Friday, and they did it under the pretext of these tragic deaths, which I think is really inappropriate.
We use tragic deaths. Not you. Tragic deaths, right? Do you remember when like people would die like during COVID and they didn't have a vaccine? They would like almost like to drag the corpse out of the coffin and fuck it on the desk of the news. Now, don't you misuse these tragic deaths. We're the ones that misuse tragic deaths. What are you going to use the next? The tragic death of Jesus Christ to say that death can be conquered if you obey certain edicts and laws? Oh, well, don't, because that's what we do.
These deaths in children, if they think there's a causal relationship between the COVID vaccine and those children's deaths, that warrants an exhaustive investigation.
Wonder what Scott Gottlieb does when he's not on the news telling you to take vaccines. He's a board member of Pfizer. Good. Okay, so let's just watch a bit more.
But they tried to slip in announcing that their re-adjudication of that data, which had previously been reviewed very exhaustively by the FDA, they tried to slip in this wholesale remaking of the vaccine approval process for vaccines that have nothing to do with the COVID vaccine.
So what do you do in your spare time? Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah, I'm just going to keep using that for context.
Remember, we even approved the HPV vaccine, which is on the cusp of ending cervical cancer on the basis of these immunobridging studies. This has been an important tool for FDA to get new vaccines on the market. I think what they want is no new vaccines on the market. And look, there's some people, I will give them credit, who have been very honest about that. I think the Secretary Kennedy has been very honest about his intentions. I think Prasad, not so much in implementing these policies, hasn't been transparent about the eventual goal of what he's trying to achieve here. But we're at a point right now where there's been such degradation at the FDA. I really worry the wheels are coming off that agency at a real critical time in the biotechnology industry. Look, the tariffs have been settled. Companies, big pharma companies, now have visibility on their cash flows. They're getting back into doing M&A. That's putting a bid under the market. You're seeing the IPO market for biotechnology stocks reopen. You're seeing really stunning data readouts. And so this is really a renaissance period in biotechnology at a point in which we're trying to compete with China, which is really surging their investments in life sciences. And now you have a deliberate effort to degrade the agency. And there's been a lot of departures from that vaccine review division. There's going to be even more. They're going to be at a point where they can announce these policies, and there's literally going to be no one left to implement them at the agency.
Meanwhile, Big Pharma is not retreating. Former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb, who now works for, where does he work? Oh, what it was when he left the FDA, the regulatory body that governs Big Pharma, he went, from now on, I just want to make sure that, you know, children everywhere are helped. So I'm going to do this charity work at schools, man. I'm going to dedicate all my time to making sure that children with conditions like eczema or asthma or, nah, not really. He's working for Pfizer. Is already pushing back against reports linking vaccines to child deaths, claiming instead that the FDA is undermining critical components of the vaccine approval system. The conflict of interest is staggering. The defensiveness is yet more so. Taken together, these disclosures paint a picture far darker than incompetence. They suggest a pandemic response shaped by political pressure, undisclosed financial entanglements, strategic suppression of ethical concerns, and a media ecosystem that only now dares to admit what it once helped obscure. The timing's no coincidence. As public trust erodes, these revelations feel less like transparency and more like preemptive damage control. What was once dismissed as fringe concern is now breaking into mainstream coverage, not because institutions have grown more honest, but because the truth can no longer be fully contained. Let me know what you think about that in the comment and chat. The public was told to trust the science, yet the science was shaped by incentives they were never allowed to see. They were told decisions were guided by ethics, yet the ethics advisors were silenced when the confusions became inconvenient. And the people offering the recommendation had financial ties to the pharmaceutical industry. I'll tell you now, I'm following the science right now. Here's what I'm scientifically deducing. Corruption. Hypocrisy, lies, conclusion, revolution. Do you remember at school when you had to do science, you had to go method, aim, all that. We had to write down the little things. Well, plainly now, we are at peak corruption. Now, Britain is repeating old patterns at the very time where the public is waking up to how deeply those patterns were manipulated. Schools are closing again, mask mandates are creeping back, and the institutions that shaped the last crisis are being exposed for suppressing critical information when it mattered most. If 2025 feels like a rerun of 2020, questions from that year never went away. And now, as the country inches back towards the language of restrictions, the question hangs ominously in the air. If another crisis emerges, will the same machinery activate itself again quietly, automatically, and without the transparency that was promised? Because if the last few weeks have shown us anything, is that the truth was not just delayed, it was buried. And those who buried it are still holding the shovels. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments and chat. Remember, join us on Rumble Premium and support Reborn. You could win a Jeep! More important than any of that, I mean, if anything can be more important than winning a Jeep, stay free. Thanks for watching the video. Have a look at this one over here, or join us Monday, Wednesday and Friday on Rumble.